Oh, that was a good crack.
Thank you very much.
I gotta have to follow that up with a good crutin.
If this is your first podcast, welcome. I'm Greg Tepper. That's Greg Powers, and this is This Week
In Crutin!
Strong.
with Greg Powers, the Next Level Athlete. Follow him on Twitter at GPowerScout. Follow Next Level Athlete on Twitter at NextLevelD1. D is fine work at TexasFootball.com/recruiting. And, of course, this segment is brought to you by our good chicken friends at Chicken Express. Chicken Express. Where were we that we saw a chicken eat?
Wichita Falls.
We're in Wichita Falls, and we
We
were.
almost
If we
did it.
literally had not been recommended something else,
like a local
like a
place.
we would have been good. But it
We
was
still
the
almost
tractor
stopped.
beam was on. And
Yeah.
we're like, oh, there you are.
What day was it?
This was last Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay,
at,
well, I'll
Six
say
Man
I
Coaching
held it.
School.
I held it down for y'all
Oh,
at the
my
Chicken
guy.
Express. So
I have no doubt.
tried something new.
Oh.
Had the jalapeno mini poppers for
Ooh,
the
how are
first
they?
time, and they're really good. They're different. Instead of having like a traditional
Bacon around it.
well, they're deep fried cheese and jalapeno, but instead of the cheese being inside the jalapeno is chopped up in the cheese, and it was pretty strong. And shout out to Karen at the Hillsboro Chicken Express.
All
Okay,
right.
she's always
Okay.
doing me right over there. Worked a 7:30 to 9 shift to take care of all of our needs out there, and the lunch was excellent.
Shout out, Karen. It's This Week in Recruiting with Greg Powers and Next Level Athlete. Let's start with our prospect on the rise. Our prospect on the rise, let's go down to Greater Alvin, let's say, to 2022 Manvel offensive guard Tevin Shaw. He has committed. He has offers from places like Texas State, Colorado State, Nevada, etc. He is going to stay local, play for Dana Holgerson and those Cougs. Tevin Shaw committed to Houston this past week, and a guy who you think is on the rise and a guy who's starting to climb up those recruiting ladders.
Well, what I really like about him is he's been able to show on tape strength, but meeting with his coaches, going through the whole scouting process as we evaluate these guys throughout the state, on a very in-depth, behind-the-scenes type of thing, his weight room numbers weren't exactly up to what he shows on the field, which to me just tells you how much better he's going to be as he gains strength to go with his size, right?
Yeah.
So he's a guy who's trending upwards in the weight room, but already has the tape to earn. I mean, he's a double-digit offers guy. He didn't have a ton of P5 offers, but he's really talented. I would describe him as a mauler at the point of attack. And what I really like about this year's Manvel team too is they've got it in the trenches. You don't, I think, traditionally think. They've had some good defensive linemen over the years, some solid offensive linemen. But I think they're deeper and more balanced up front on both sides of the ball. And I think that's what's going to make them a title contender this year. They're a team to really watch. And Houston going into what I think has to be, like, if you're the Houston Cougars, Dana Holgerson, Manvel's got to be like a school that you're at all the time. Like, you got to be recruiting a school to have a pipeline into Manvel is a big deal. They've only got 4 high school commitments right now. 2 of them are from the Houston area now, with Tevin Shaw at Manvel, Cardale Pat at Stafford. So I think that's got to be a focus for them. There's so much talent in Houston, and really out of any other big city in the state, Houston to me has the most under the radar talent consistently. There are guys there who can really play that need more, not exposure's not the right word, but there are guys there who people don't know about.
One of the things that watching his film is this is a guy that very clearly, look, at the point of attack he's excellent, but he can move
Right.
a little bit too. You know what I mean? I think that there's maybe this notion of okay, well, you're an interior lineman. That means you're not very mobile. I mean, seeing him, like, the footwork's pretty sound. He they're on kind of a trap play right there. He kind of pulls around and the footwork's really sound. But this is a guy who's got some legs underneath him. He's not just a big body. The big body helps, and he can push some people around up front. But he's not that kind of guy who's just like, I'm a wall. You're gonna have to run around me.
Rankings purposes wise, a lot of guys that you see towards the top of the list are guys who are tackles in high school who can project to play inside, but most of the time they're playing left or right tackle. And all the people who go out and do rankings and make them public are going to latch onto those guys first because they're typically more athletic. But sometimes they just don't have that mentality to play the interior, this is a guy who you don't have to worry about.
Most certainly. Keep an eye on him. He's the newest commitment to the Houston Cougars. It is Manvel offensive guard Tevin Shaw. Let's get to our commit of the week. Our commit of the week, and I know that the last guy was a commit of the week. We have different categories.
He committed.
Denton Ryan cornerback Austin Jordan has committed. He had offers most notably from Oklahoma and Ohio State, but the Texas Longhorns beat out those two for the number 23 ranked player in the DCTF Hot 100. Denton Ryan cornerback Austin Jordan. Give me a little bit of a snapshot on what the Longhorns are getting out of this Denton Ryan playmaker.
Well, I love his versatility first and foremost. He's a guy who, to me, he's always been a lockdown island type of guy with size, right? Like he's a guy who's been battle tested, plays at one of the top programs in the state, plays against top teams all the time, and he's super consistent. I think that's something that's overlooked a lot of times when you're talking about defensive backs. And I was reading some stuff surrounding his commitment to Texas, and there were some who felt like he had a down season in what was Denton Ryan's state championship run last year in comparison to his sophomore season where, he blew up and got all these offers. And I don't think I agree with it, and here's why. Mm-hmm. If you're playing corner and they're not talking about you, that means you're really good.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like a little different.
I don't want to compare playmakers, but let's talk about Denver Harris. Denver Harris, I haven't seen his stats. I bet they stink. I bet his stats absolutely stink. He might have one interception and 3 pass breakups or something like that. But if anything, that's because they know not to throw to him, at him. That's one of those things that you've got to make sure you have that playmaking. If you have that playmaking ability, he's that guy. And I think that in Austin Jordan, you're right. The less you hear about him, the better. It's kind of the way to think about it with cornerbacks.
His sophomore season, they were playing in the Star, and I was standing on the sidelines with DCTF's own William Wilkerson.
Hi, Will.
And I said, Will, this guy's going to be an elite national type of guy. And I stand by that. And his track times are sneaky good. He's a sub 1100 meter guy who has, the size and physicality of a safety. So I think that he could play corner, nickel, or safety at Texas. I kind of like him as a corner, sticking at the next level, but he can do so many different things. And as I look deeper into this cycle of 2022 recruits in state, the defensive back class is pretty good, because there are guys I think now down into, I think Terrence Brooks, who's committed to Ohio State, is around that 30 to 35 range. Austin Jordan's number 23. You have Julian Humphrey, who's in the 30 to 35 range. I think all those guys are risers. As I put together the next top 100, which will come out preseason before the start of the year, those are guys who are going to creep up in these rankings. And there are a couple of those guys who I've earmarked as being guys, by the time the dust settles, that all the national guys are like, oh, well, how did we not have these guys rated in the top 10 at the beginning of this?
The newest Texas Longhorn commit, Austin Jordan from Denton. Ryan, we're talking This Week in Recruiting with Greg Powers, the Next Level Athlete, here on Texas Football Today. Get involved in the conversation, #TF Today. Let's go to our underclassmen of the week. Let's talk about a 4-star running back out of the Fort Worth area, Sergio Snider. He is of note today because he has transferred. He is transferring. He was at Fort Worth Nolan Catholic. He is transferring for the 2021 season over to Arlington Martin to play for Bob Wager's squad. There's a guy already with 14 offers. And what's interesting to me is here's a guy who last year I think popped off the tape, and that's getting half the carries because Mego was there too. So here's a guy that maybe when he can become a showcase back could give you those kind of showcase numbers and kind of, I think, put himself on that big platform.
Arlington's back.
Yeah.
Arlington ISD, as far as top talent is concerned, I mean, they never really went anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But next year, I think, is going to be a loaded year in that district, in the city. And those are some, I always talk about that. You'll have to tell me which district it is. The Flower Mound, Marcus, Hebron.
Yeah, it's District 6.
Is it
655.
Yeah. District 6 is always
I like to think of it as the Coppell district,
yeah.
But that's okay. Go on.
I always love that district because of the they're like traditional rivalries. all the games are hard hitting. Well, this is probably number 2 for me. I love watching these games, and he brings that blue collar mentality. I think he's a tough in the middle of the field runner, and Arlington Martin is loaded with top talent heading into next year. And there are a lot of guys in that city that we're keeping a close eye on, and I think like a lot of the recruiting guys who are on the recruiting beat are going to be traveling down there to see these guys play next year. It's going to be like a hotbed.
Yeah, and here's a guy, I think it's going to be really interesting because, and I don't think this is necessarily fair, but I think that there is a notion that at the private school level, you're held to a different standard because private schools, I think it's fair to say that the teams are not as bunched together as far as quality is concerned. That there are teams like they're really, really good. Fort Nolan's a perfect example. Really, really good teams, but there are also teams that they're going to go out there and play. They're going to straight up overmatch. You know what I mean? And so I think sometimes here's an example of a guy who's not going to go play at Arlington Martin. Well, Arlington Martin, as good as they are, they're not going to overmatch a ton of teams simply because I think that the consistency of quality is a little bit better at the public school ranks. And so I think that's what's going to be particularly interesting here is watching him week in and week out playing against what's going to be really elite competition. That's not. I hope that's not coming off as disrespectful to the private school ranks. It's just to say that I think that the gap between the haves and the have-nots at the private school ranks is a little bit wider than it is at the public school ranks, which may give Sergio Snider an opportunity here at Arlington Martin to really flash what he can do on a consistent basis.
I don't think it's any disrespect to say, Nolan Catholic was one of the most loaded teams in the state last year with D1 talent.
Dude, they were ridiculous.
They have a lot of really good players, but what you're going to be facing in the city of Arlington is quite different on the defensive side of the football. The depth, the size, all that stuff is going to be quite different for Sergio Snider, and I think that he's one of these guys who's going to rise to the occasion. He's one of the best running backs in the state,
yes.
And he's going to be on a bigger stage playing 6A ball for sure. You know, that where he's going to be on TV more, he's going to be on the highlights more, and people are going to know him a little bit better just from playing at one of the top schools in the state. And Fort Worth Nolan Catholic is a team that went to the state championship game last year. So I mean, he emerged there, got 14 offers there. I'm not going to say that he's going to get more offers playing at Arlington Martin, but he's going to get. We're going to talk about him probably more here.
It's going to be interesting to watch simply because whenever you have a big time playmaker like that moving from the private school ranks to the public school ranks, it's always interesting to see what the difference is because we know there's just exceptional talent at the private school ranks. But I think that it's a little bit interesting whenever you watch guys go from the private school ranks. How do they adjust? Is there an adjustment period going to the public school?
If anything, when he is successful, I think it's an endorsement for some of the private school teams to say, hey, this is the type of talent we have, and they can also be successful here.
And not that we'll get off of this here in just a second, but I think it's worth mentioning that I do think that the private school ranks remain pretty underrated. And if you were talking about, I think there were times in the past. I use TCU as a good example. TCU made a living whenever they were in the Mountain West and when they're kind of before they got to the Big 12 of going and finding these diamonds in the rough. I think that if those diamonds in the rough exist anymore, they might be at the private school ranks because especially at the 11th, you go to at this point, you go to Monday, there's going to be recruiters at Monday High School. You know what I mean? But I think that if you're looking for those guys that are maybe flying under the radar, the private schools maybe have a greater depth of that simply because they do not get that kind of spotlight that the public schools do.
And I, covering a lot of teams in other states throughout the years, I always am curious, what would it be like if Prestonwood, Fort Worth Nolan Catholic, Parish Episcopal was competing against the top teams in Oklahoma week in and week out? Because what we're up against here in Texas is we've got a lot of good football, guys.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good football.
Yeah, everywhere you look.
And I think these teams, if you plugged them and played them in different states, the private school teams here in Texas would compete for championships.
Most certainly.
So.
Most certainly. All right, let's get on to our recruit of the week, and we're going to stick in the private school ranks. Talking about 2022 Argyle Liberty Christian athlete Cristian Driver. You may recognize the last name. He is the son of former All-Pro wide receiver Donald Driver, and he is going to be pulling the trigger in about a week. Thanks a lot, dude. You could do it before next week, this week in recruiting. But instead, we're going to have to wait 2 weeks to talk about where you commit. But no, Cristian Driver from Argyle Liberty Christian has 43 offers. He's our number 16 prospect in the DCTF Hot 100. Again, talk about the depth and the private school ranks. Also, he's our private school cover boy, the 2021 summer edition of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Let's talk about feel where he might land. What's the thought among the brain trust in the recruiting world about where he might land?
I think he's going to Penn State. I mean,
okay.
That's where I think he ends up. That was one of his first. I mean, he's got 43 offers, y'all. 43. So he's one of the most heavily recruited prospects in the state, regardless of position. And he has that, as you talked about, that tradition, that lineage connection to the NFL through his father, and has just grown up as one of these top guys. I mean, he emerged on the scene as a freshman and hasn't looked back. I think there was some debate for me within my own head as I thought about him, was safety or wide receiver going to be his best position, because he was really good at safety during his younger days. He could play both ways. He still does play both ways a lot. But, man, he's really good with the football in his hands. And one thing I notice about watching his tape is that he gets separation. He's able to separate from defensive backs and runs really good routes. To me, he's one of the guys on the Texas high school football scene this year who's not talked about enough for whatever reason. I don't know how he's got 40. He's the son of Donald Driver. He's got 43 offers. And to me, there's cover boy.
Yeah, cover boy.
So he does have some exposure, but I just feel like as I sit down and talk to my buddies, we have these conversations about the great football players in the state, and he's not he's, to me, not in those discussions enough.
Right. And I think, again, we've harped on it a lot in today's show, but like a lot of it I think has to do with just the private school ranks and how those are. I think those don't get the same kind of spotlight that the public schools do, just by virtue of the fact that the vast majority of high school football in the state is public school. But yeah, there's big time playmakers there, and Cristian Driver is one of those guys who is going to make some team very happy next week after This Week in Recruiting. Thanks, dude. No, I'm kidding.
We got somebody up our sleeves for next week, I think.
Ooh,
We'll see.
that is what we call
That's a tease.
a horizontal tease. Vertical tease? Anyway, Greg Powers, Next Level Athlete. Follow him on Twitter at GPowersScout. Follow Next Level Athlete on Twitter, Next Level D1. See his fine work at TexasFootball.com/recruiting.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you would like more and to be notified when they come out, go ahead and click that subscribe button right down there. You can also watch Texas Football Today every day live at noon on TexasFootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, and right here on YouTube. For more of the best coverage of Texas football in the Lone Star State, go to TexasFootball.com/subscribe.